Hello, this meeting is being recorded. Persuasion, Bill.
Persuasion?
Yes.
Are you persuading me? Am I persuading you, or are we persuading the listener?
I'm not sure how any of it's going to happen.
Okay.
But I want us to think this evening about how we may be persuaded into some kind of action or response through what we see in visual.
What is the difference? What's the definition or the difference between persuasion and manipulation? Same thing?
Maybe very little. Persuasion has a greater manipulation just sounds all out bad.
It doesn't persuasion have a slightly sort of white hat kind of feel to it?
There's a more genteel version, which is persuasion. It's softer, maybe, but it's still as insidious, I would say. No?
Yeah. Could be, yeah.
Anyway, this is actually also in context of a kind of political persuasion as well, and thinking about art and politics, how they often overlap, and how artists maybe embed or encode political messages in their work, and that maybe we need to be
consciously or not.
Well, it could be either, and we know lots of contemporary artists who make a real show of politics in their work.
Sure.
But I wonder about those people who don't overtly present a political view, for example, but nonetheless are still persuasive in their politics.
Yeah.
Anyway, got an unusual choice. This is not a painting that I like, but it's a very interesting painting. It's Hogarth, the British painter, 18th century British painter. It's an election entertainment, and it's one of 4 paintings that he made that were in series that dealt with or satirized the very unfair way in which the wealthy voted in open ballots where it was not secret. People were prone to corruption anyway, but where people who were already rich and landed became richer still.
It happened back then too?
Yeah. Anyway, the reason why I brought this up is that as a so-called political painting, I wonder if there's anything persuasive about it at all. And more than that, that actually maybe there's a sense in this that we could be persuaded into the wrong thing based on Hogarth's intention.
Okay.
Which is, from Hogarth's point of view, to make fun of these rather grotesque, beastly conservatives who are celebrating their win at an Oxfordshire election.
Yeah, with people out on the streets.
Well, yeah, people out the window, yes. Yeah. There's all kinds of symbols and codes in here as well that are really particular.
It's a little Where's Waldo, you know?
It is. It's also kind of reminiscent of things like the Last Supper. There's lots of other kind of artists' symbols in this that we could think about, how the ceiling's been painted, for example. Like, where does the light come from? Lots of things to notice about it. But more that Hogarth, very well known as a satirist, somebody who would make fun of the establishment, created a series of paintings in which the people he so fabulously satirized and made fun of would end up being the people who bought the paintings.
Pulled the wool over their eyes.
I don't know.
Was it a, you know, I'm making fun of you, but there's something cool in the fact that you own a thing that's making fun of you? Or do they not know that they were getting made fun of?
I think it would have been very obvious they're being made fun of. I mean, if we look at the assembled characters, we've got lots of things that are about really not demonizing them, but certainly making them seem ridiculous. Sort of slovenly, poor
and
in
very drunk.
character, poor in character.
Sure.
But I do wonder about this. As I said, Hogarth was hoping maybe that people who saw this, or indeed would see the lithographs that he made later of the same painting, would feel about these people as if they were ridiculous. Whereas actually, I wonder if I was a poor peasant in the 18th century and I saw this image, I would think, well, I would like that for myself. Feasting, drinking, fat, rotund, glowing complexioned, jolly looking humans, wealthy humans.
Sure. And I'm sure there's a certain amount of envy and jealousy involved in all of that too, right? Like as much as you hate them, you also want to be, you'd love to be one of them. I mean, not this grotesque version of them, but probably the lifestyle that they led was better than working some crappy job in the shop or, in the blacksmith or whatever.
Well, in the fields.
Or in the fields.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the people playing music. It's so good.
In terms of persuasion,
yep.
Can a painting like this ever persuade anyone to do anything?
When I see stuff like this, I think about cartoons and Punch and those kinds of things, and a lot of times, of course, the true intentions, or a lot of times they need to be explained because the goals are lost to history, right? Unless you know a lot about the 1790s or the 1810s or whatever it is, you may not know what they're satirizing and why they're satirizing it that way, So it's interesting as an interloper from 2022. Oh my God, it's 2022. I feel like I look at this as these people are not even real people, that it's all just, I mean, obviously they're not real people, but you understand what I'm saying, that
it's a cartoon.
Yes, that's what it feels like to me. Like almost an absurdist. It's one step away from caricature, like true caricature.
Yes.
Like modern caricature.
And yet we know that this actually did represent something of fact. We know that there was an MP in Oxfordshire who was elected around about this time, and this is the particular candidate that he was satirizing. As I said, across 4 paintings, this is the last in the series. There's another one outside an inn where somebody's basically paying someone else for a vote. It's really, it is making fun of it, and as you said, it's cartoon-like, but it's also really dark. There's something in this. I mean, later, 100 years from now, someone like Goya is painting grotesque faces. They're really similar to the faces we're finding in this crowd of revelers.
But doesn't it feel like in this, at least, there's this sense that there is this, grotesque corruption going on, but there's not all that much I can do about it except try to spin it and make some people laugh, but it's probably not going to make any difference. Where Goya feels like he almost went a step further than that, where he abstracted it out of reality, so it just became this sort of monolith of evil kind of stuff, versus this, which is, I know all this stuff is going on, but there's nothing I can do about it. It's like some guy going to Davos and, doing caricatures of all the rich people there, would be the equivalent today, Wait, who in this is supposed to be the candidate? What is do we know?
Well,
Am I missing it?
There are 2.
Okay.
And I might have this wrong, but I think the younger seeming man who is sidled up to the rather unattractive woman on the far side is one of them.
Oh, I see. Oh yeah, yeah. He's the only guy who actually looks like a real person kind of in it.
And then the other one, I think, is actually the man on the other side in red, who is way back, having knocked things off the table.
That guy, okay, now let me ask you a question. It looks to me like he got hit by a brick and got knocked backwards.
Yeah.
Is that what's happening?
Through the window.
Yeah, so somebody threw a thing through the window, they're throwing bricks, and that guy got knocked over in the head, and people just haven't noticed yet.
I think also, I don't know anything about politics really in this period of history, but this is the Whigs, which moved into kind of, the Whigs became essentially what's the Liberal Party, and then
Yeah.
the Tories, the Conservative Party. And the Conservatives are the victors here, and the Whigs, I think, are somehow sucking up to them or something. So there is lots of subtext in this about what was actually happening in the political realm at this time.
Well, there's also a ripped painting of the king on the wall.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of things in this. I mean, there's stuff about, apparently, I can't see it and I don't know where it is, but when I was reading about it, there's stuff about, let me get this right, resettled or naturalized Jews. It was made a law that Jews were allowed to settle without special separate status or something that disallowed them from certain things. And so through like a naturalization, this was passed in Parliament and people were up in arms, very anti-Semitic. And there's lots of stuff apparently in this painting that's somehow about that. I don't know where it is or what it is because I don't understand all the symbols in this. And I think that in itself is quite fascinating, that here we have a painting that is loaded. We know it's loaded with symbols that are trying to tell us things, signal things to us, and perhaps persuade us of something. But because I don't live in the 18th century,
Sure,
I don't understand them. And therefore I am persuaded no longer either way. I just look at this as a reveler.
the symbolism doesn't mean anything to you anymore because the world has moved on.
Yes. And then when I think about equivalence in contemporary art, I wonder about the sting in the tail of anything that claims to be hyper political now, 100 years in the future.
Yeah, I saw some art this weekend at the Brooklyn Museum that I was looking at, and I thought, first of all, I don't think this is particularly good anyway. But even if it was good, this has the political shelf life of maybe a year and a half. You know what I mean? That it's just going to feel really dated really quickly. I guess there's a question for you. If an artist is making work that's supposed to be politically motivating in a way, is it better to be more timeless, or is that irrelevant because it needs to do what it needs to do now and it doesn't matter if it's lives forever?
Well, that's an intention of the artist.
Yeah.
I mean, there will be statements, I suppose, that art might make that could transcend the kind of notions of the time.
Sure.
But most things that we make images of are utterly limited.
Sure.
I think maybe this is why I like abstract painting so much. Because the symbolic value is not as heavy.
Yes, but it also means that it's not necessarily, it's arguably, in my way I would put it, it's also not as rich, right? Because like
maybe
if something is more vague, it, our ever living argument about whether something if something can be too open to interpretation is actually saying anything at all, right? So I mean, this is like been my longstanding thing. I, for one, by the way, can I just say I love Norman Rockwell.
I thought you might.
Rockwell paintings are like, they're so good. Like they look great. They're like skillfully done. They're structured. They say what they're going to say. Not all of them are obviously this literal.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, Rockwell's paintings oftentimes were really just adverts. They might have told a story, but they were telling a story to sell you something. And that in itself, I thought was interesting for this, because, I mean, this is a painting that is very specifically about Ruby Bridges walking to school, having to be escorted into school in New Orleans by 4 US Marshals, because otherwise she would not have been allowed entry by the baying mob of white segregationists who did not want to allow her safe passage into that school. Um,
And this is a good example though of where we are currently in sort of a middle period, right? Where obviously racism still exists. No one's doubting that. But at the same time, there aren't mobs of people keeping a black girl out of a school in the United States right now. You know what I mean? We still remember it. There's still racism. There's still all kinds of problems, but it's not quite as explicit as this anymore. It's still there. It's just different. I mean, and maybe
this is in our parents' lifetime.
Oh, absolutely.
This event.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, here we are 50 years later, and it does feel different than this. And maybe 50 years from now, or 150 years from now, God willing, this will look as anachronistic as the last one, where it's like, I don't get it. Why are there marshals? It's a little girl, and these guys, like, why wouldn't they let her in? I don't understand what the problem is. But hopefully we'll get there, right? You know,
with the way we receive it, though, Bill, and this is particular to you or I or whoever looks, are we receiving this in such a way that it instructs us to do something? Or is it asking us only to look?
I think that Rockwell at times can be inspirational. I think Rockwell at times can be commentary, right? I don't see Rockwell as somebody who is changing people's minds. I think Rockwell tends to make people feel better about what they already believe. You know, he's solidifying. He's not transmogrifying, you know? At least I don't know. Does this painting feel very American to you? I always get a weird sense that I look at this and this feels very American to me. And obviously this happened in America. And obviously America has this crazy, especially in the South, this crazy racist segregationist stuff that happened for 150 years and after slavery, you know. But at the same time, this feels to me like if I lived somewhere else, I would look at it and it would feel very American in the same way as a Hollywood movie or a, you know, Catcher in the Rye feels American, you know. Does it, or am I reading too much into that?
I think it does, but then also I would say that the culture I have grown up in has been so saturated with what you might think of as American culture. Sure. That the line is blurred about where this belongs. I acknowledge and accept and know, of course, that it is an image of a child in New Orleans in America. I know that. When I look at it, it's like asking me, is a Wyeth painting American?
Yeah. Okay. There's another good example. Do those feel American to you? Let me flip it. Does anything feel British to you?
Well, yes, actually, that Hogarth painting feels very British, but that's not necessarily that's not necessarily a good thing. And what I ask about that in myself is that when I identify things kind of with a nationality,
yeah,
am I doing it a great disservice? Am I doing myself a great disservice by being so close to the possibility that it could be speaking about so much more than a particular time or place?
And for not for nothing, but like you also have an example. Take, I don't know, take Hockney. It's like, it's a British dude, but those paintings feel like LA. You know what I mean? Like, you know, there's a lot of his work that feels very American. It doesn't feel like you're sitting around a swimming pool outside of London.
Do you want to try and define that, Bill?
Do you don't know? Do you understand what I'm saying, or do you not understand what I'm saying?
I understand. I wonder if you can define it.
Which part? I don't understand.
What American looks like.
Oh God. You know, it's interesting. When you said the thing about how so much of popular culture of the second half of the 20th century was so dominated by America, music and movies and TV shows and all the rest of it, is as many TV shows as we stole from the Brits and rebranded and remade here in America. You know, popular culture was very much defined by America in a lot of ways, because even all the British stuff that came out in the British invasion was all just like Black American stuff that went to England that came back to us, like with, British people singing. It is hard to, you know what I'm saying? Am I wrong? I mean, Rolling Stones and even the Beatles to some extent and all that kind of stuff, right? But
can you see that? Can you see the folly in what you're saying? Can you see that there's something problematic in it? It makes
with the fact that
it makes an assumption that culture starts with America.
Oh, absolutely. Well, look at like all of the Black culture that I'm talking about ultimately came from Africa, right? So I mean, it all came from somewhere before it came from there. I think, but I guess what I'm trying to say is the fact that it was so dominant for a time period that, man, I don't know. It's very hard to describe what makes that American.
It is, and yet you and I both know it.
Yeah, it's definitely a know it when you see it kind of thing. I mean, this has to do with the fact that it has this historical element to it.
Yeah.
And even, you look at a Rockwell painting of a barbershop that went out the window of the barbershop, where they're in the back room. Even the architecture and the stuff in the like that all feels very American, right? The settings are very American. It's like if you had, people doing a Jane Austen thing up in the Peak District or something like that, that would feel very English. You know what I'm saying? Like just because the countryside looks a certain way, or the stately homes or what have you. So I wonder how much of it is just the setting as much as it is the story, the message.
Okay. What about who sees the image? So we're here, 2022. You're in Brooklyn, I'm in Bournemouth. If we were somewhere different seeing this image, or even just between ourselves, do we receive it? Do we receive it differently? And because of that, are we incited to act differently from seeing?
Well, can I answer that by sort of, I'm not going to answer your question, but it's going to answer your question. Is that fair? Okay. It's interesting because when I look at this, some people would see this as, look at the terrible thing America is that they'd keep this little girl out of school, segregation, all the rest of it. Look at the negatives of America. For whatever reason, I don't know if it's how I was brought up or, the era that I was brought up or the whatever. I look at this and I think, see, when push comes to shove, America does the right thing. And I understand that that's loaded to the hilt. But I look at it and I think, oh, see, yeah, there's people throwing tomatoes. But then there's those 4 guys walking the little girl into the school, right? Like in the end, America gets there eventually. And that makes this somehow doesn't make me ashamed of America. It actually makes me proud of America in a way. Does that make sense? And so in some ways it's a weird, having a hard time putting words on it. Go ahead. It's a hard one to suss out.
I know. I know.
She's like, I know how hard it is. That's why I brought it up.
I think as much as I can understand, I think I understand what you mean about America doing the right thing. I would be very careful about the position, again, I put America in and what I put within that.
Of course, but load. Then again, you're not American, and you see what I'm saying? I wonder if that has as much to do with it,
That was actually my question. Really.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly am biased, by the fact, but then again, how much of British wealth came from the slave trade and screwing over China and India, but you know what I mean? But people are still proud to be English, so it's like everybody has their original sins,
Do you think that people on seeing this painting would have thought, of course, all children should go to school?
I think at the time there was probably some controversy in it, and Rockwell was saying, it's also interesting. I don't know his sources for this, but this like very dark-skinned black young girl in a very like perfectly white dress, like bleach white dress, you know, it's like the contrast of that is just, it's like a very like angelic kind of thing, right? Like that he's playing with imagery. There's certainly manipulation going on.
I mean,
right?
look at the formation of those
Yeah,
male
very
white,
militaristic. Yeah,
but also it's not just militaristic. It's kind of absurd. It's like a dance. It's a
yeah, yeah.
theater.
I mean, it's like they're it's like they're marching in time, is what it is. Yeah,
And
I
about to
mean,
click their fingers, and you know,
yeah,
there's something that's again, that feeds maybe into a stereotype for me about being American. A
who's
particular
what?
kind, a particularly middle-aged man in a particularly beige suit.
Yeah,
Uh,
very
with
JFK, very like that kind
yeah,
of thing.
that kind of yeah. That kind of comes through this. And also, I mean,
Sure.
Rockwell is a skilled advertiser, you know, he's going to be manipulating us all the time. We're seeing this from the eye level of the child,
Yep.
even though we're
Yeah,
not seeing
we
it
don't
from
even
her
see the
point of view.
identity of those people.
We
Yeah.
don't need to.
Yeah.
We don't need to, maybe.
I'd also like to point, I mean, like I said about Rockwell, me being a fan, he's really good at this. Like the composition, the skill, the painting, like everything. It's just like, it's just good. It's just exceptionally well done, you know?
Yeah, I mean, he did this, he moved, you'll know this, others might not. He did have, he was rather held back, I think, in terms of the content of what he produced for a while. And he moved to Look magazine, which gave him slightly more political freedom. And that's when he started to make work that was more like this. I mean, before it was things like Santa holding the Parker pen.
Sure. He lived up in Vermont and in Massachusetts and in New York, upstate New York. And there are a few different towns that sort of claim him and have museums about him. Mm-hmm. And one of them is right around where my wife grew up. And one of her friends that she went to school with when she was younger has lived in Vermont for generations. And her grandparents and aunts and uncles are all models in a bunch of paintings because he would use the people in the towns as models for all of these things. So it's just crazy that there's like this, you know, I know people who have relatives who were in these paintings, you know, because there is definitely a feeling too that they are based upon real people in a way that, I mean, caricatures in a different way than the first painting. You know, but caricatures nonetheless.
We're not really getting to the point of what I'm asking us about this evening, though, which is to do with persuasion.
Sure.
Like, what are we persuaded of in this image? I mean, can we guess at what Rockwell wanted to persuade us of? Look at the title, The Problem We All Live With.
Sure. I think he wants to show the absurdity of all of this hullabaloo about this little girl who deserves to go in there, not being able to go in there. I mean, look, KKK is written on the wall, all the rest of it. Yeah, go ahead.
But there's also a grave mistake to be made with this. In the same way, there's a bit of a mistake in Hogarth's painting, which is depending on who's seeing it and depending how one takes the title, one could either align in one direction or the other with this.
Sure. Yeah.
The problem we all live with, well, is the problem the little girl.
Sure.
In the other painting, the entertainment, well, who, if they're a peasant working the fields all day, doesn't want to lie fat and bloated after feasting? Yeah. So, you know, sometimes these kind of political messages that are that we might believe we receive through what we see is really just as well,
it's an image that could be manipulated or believed by either side of an argument. Yeah.
Yeah, but it reflects back to us what we already think.
Sure. Do you see the tomato squash on the wall? Do you see like a phoenix kind of thing in there? Okay. Do you think that that's intentional?
Highly likely. I mean, Rockwell was meticulous.
Yeah, I know. But I also could see him throwing tomatoes against the wall, and that was a particularly nice splat that he liked. I could also imagine that. You know what I mean?
We're still not answering the question.
Well, I think that the reality of it is that in this case, like I said, I don't think of Rockwell as somebody who is trying to persuade anybody so much as he wants to create a record on the right side of history so that people can feel good about the decision they've already made.
Yes, hang on. So then that in itself is political.
Well, I'm not saying it's the right. Well, I'm saying it's the right side of history. I'm not saying that everyone thinks it's the right side of history.
No.
I'm just saying that, like, I think that, say, racial progress in the 60s, there is a right answer and there's a wrong answer. But I think that whatever you believed before this time period, this is sort of like a get on board. This is the way things are in America. So, and here's a symbol. This is very iconic in almost a religious sense, I think, this particular painting. And I think a lot of his images are. Yeah. They have this perfection and reverence that makes them feel like they're indelible, you know?
Very interesting how we're being so evasive.
Well, I don't think that there's a good answer, you know? Tell me about this one. I know I've read the label at MoMA, but I don't remember the reasoning behind this one.
So in his long lifetime, Picasso is considered to have painted 3 great anti-war paintings. And the first one was Guernica.
Yeah.
In 1937, which was, as most people know about, the bombing of the market town Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. And
have you been there to see that guy? That one?
No.
Madrid?
No, not in Madrid, no.
You should, it's good.
The sense through Guernica is that, you know, that it's emblematic of the Spanish people. The plight, the suffering of the Spanish people is kind of infused in that painting. When we get to 44, 45, when this was painted, Picasso was aware of atrocities that were being committed by the Nazis. And there is some dispute about where he took this from. But I just want to complete talking about the 3. So the first was Guernica. The second one is the Charnel House, 44, 45, at the end of the Second World War. And then the next one is in 1951. And it's Korea. I would ask anybody listening to this to go and look at the 3 paintings and to think of them as time tags of suffering and man's inhumanity to man in the 20th century. They are absolutely extraordinary paintings in my mind, in my view. But I think they are extraordinary anyway, because they document something of war that is obviously not about glory, that does not fit the historical kind of context, paradigm, or convention about making glorious that which is violent or triumphant. There's nothing triumphant in this.
No, and it is interesting that maybe World War II might be the last time where there was really sort of true triumphal art about war. You know, people just don't think about it that way anymore as much. I mean, yeah, they're like, oh, you know, the Americans come back from Desert Storm and they do the thing on Broadway in New York or whatever, like for the servicemen people. That happens, of course, but it isn't, you know, posters on the walls of men and women looking very, you know, like there isn't this Alexander the Great kind of thing going on.
No, hang on. I'm sorry. I do think that what you're saying is probably, I think,
not true.
With all due respect, quite naive.
No, that's fine.
Because we might not have a triumphal poster or propaganda that is blatant in telling us that our king and country needs us, for example. But we do still have these, again, really insidious propagandist strategies.
That stuff, totally, sure. But those are,
and
but
also,
those are not.
I know this
Go
is
ahead.
really unpopular and to speak about, maybe especially with American, but especially now because of what is happening horrifically, dreadfully in Ukraine. You know,
Sure.
we have a situation that has emerged in which all of Russia
Yes.
is now vilified.
Yeah.
So not just Putin,
Sure.
all of Russia. And we saw this when the Twin Towers were attacked. There was an immediate vilification of all Muslims.
Sure. In the same way
I-
that you could argue that the attacks, say, on September 11th happened because of the vilification of all Americans. So I mean,
Right.
it's like
So
like putting people in
we're
buckets
not,
is what people
we
do.
might be just changing the channel a little bit on
Sure.
how we present these big statements of nationalism, of segregation, of being part of that group or this group. All of it is so separative.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that I'm not saying that there isn't political propaganda. Of course there is. You know, mission accomplished on the aircraft carrier. Absolutely. But I don't think that, you know, in the same way that, you know, people made paintings of the king knight coming back with like blood on his sword.
Yeah, but they don't have to have paintings anymore about it, Bill, because you got the front page of the Times.
Yeah, I guess you do. But theoretically, hopefully, there's some independence in the decisions that are made of what goes on there.
Oh, I think
I don't know.
People are as stupid now as they've ever been.
Absolutely. But at the same time, but doesn't, in some ways, your 3 Picasso paintings you're talking about prove that, because while Guernica and this and the Korean painting are all of specific incidents, right? They are somewhat interchangeable in the idea that, you know, war leads to human misery. And this is still true today. You could have this painting made today about what's going on in Kiev, and we're exactly where we were in 1944 or 1937 or 1953 or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
So I guess what I'm saying is that, like, it is interesting to, what's most interesting to me about, you know, it's like the Don McCullough stuff, right? Where it's just like, well, like at a certain point, that's the guy's name, right? The photographer?
Don McCullen.
Cullen. Where it's, you know, he's just like, you know, I went and shot all these pictures of war. Didn't stop anybody from killing people the next time. So really, what did we accomplish? So
Right,
in some ways, you know, you look at, go ahead.
No, this is the question. This is what I want us to come up on. We see a painting like this. You go to MoMA and you see this. This is a huge canvas.
Yep.
There's, I mean, just a bit
not as big as Guernica, but pretty big.
No, it's not as big as Guernica, but it's still a very large canvas. You are looking at 3 bodies, a family, a mother, a father, and a child. They are beneath a table setting, a domestic table. And the title, the charnel house, I mean, people, if you don't know, if you're watching, you don't know what charnel house is. The charnel house is the bone store. And really what it meant is that, for example, in medieval churchyards, if they became too busy with increasing numbers of the dead, they would dig up the old bones. And rather than being disrespectful to them, they would in actual fact itemize them and organize them in a house for bones, the charnel house. Now, Picasso apparently saw images of a massacred Spanish family, and that's where this image came from. But because of when it was made and because of what was happening in death camps, that, you know, though there in so many ways there's actually very little photographic evidence to go on, and at the time there would have been limited access to images of what was happening
of the Holocaust in 1944, 1945. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Nonetheless, he was very well informed, and he was very well connected to people who would have had eyes all over Europe.
Sure.
So he would have known what was going on. And he made this in response to that, in the same way that in 1951, massacre in Korea, the images of an assembled group of women and children who are faced with a firing squad of what appear to be almost like robots waiting to murder them. Pregnant women and children in this painting. It's a most jarring, awful image to witness. Now, if I'm thinking about persuasion, I find these paintings incredibly persuasive. What I want to ask myself is, what do they persuade me to do? I
I find them
understand.
powerful. I don't know that I would say they're persuasive, but okay.
No, I think, if we look at images, photographic images in the press of a dead family, as
Yep.
I have done just earlier today, there was a dead Ukrainian family in the street, a mum, a dad, a boy and a girl.
Yep.
And I looked at that image. In fact, it wasn't a still image, it was film. And I thought to myself, what does this make me do? What does this make me do? I watched very carefully. I aligned myself in the role of mother, and I saw a dead child, which is one of the most poignant and powerful images. I mean, Picasso knew that anyway. Even in Guernica, we know the mother with the dead child was the blueprint really for all his weeping women paintings, women paintings, because that kind of iconic image, a woman with a dead child, there is nothing more horrific for a mother than her dead child. I then, through watching this film, almost became obsessed and possessed with the character of each one of those poor dead humans
who you had never met and you see very little of before they're dead. Yeah.
And then I thought, what can I do? I can do nothing about this dead family, but I might do something about another family that don't have to die if I somehow intervene. And then, of course, I think to myself, what the hell can I do sitting in
So where'd
the
you come
office?
out?
The same way I think a lot of other people do at the moment, which is that there's an incredible feeling of shame that there's not a lot we feel we can do.
Yeah.
And that if we're able to, we could put money into a problem. But is that just alleviating a guilt without addressing the real problem?
Yeah. Do they require money right now, or is that actually going to get to anyone to actually do any good? Yeah.
Well, I mean, like many other people in the UK, I don't know if it's the same in the States, there was a non-uniform day at Imogen's school on Monday. And rather than making it a payment or a donation that then goes to a charity, everybody was asked instead to bring items to send to what will inevitably be refugee camps in Poland.
Right.
And so Imogen and I on Sunday went round a local store and we bought things on the list. And we came home and we dutifully separated them all out, and we did a bag that was stuff for adult male, we did a bag that was stuff for adult female, and so on. And in doing that, I can see how I would become completely obsessed with doing that, and that I almost couldn't stop.
Right.
What does it incite me to do? What does it make me do to see this? What do I do when I see this painting? This painting to me also, I think you've kind of suggested, it has a timeless quality. It's as relevant now as it would have been in 1944.
I think is it the sergeant painting of the guys from World War I all holding on to each other? No, who did the painting of the guys with all they're all blinded by the gas and they're all have their hands on each other's shoulders walking forward through the mud? You know that painting? It's this big scale painting, but it's like yes, that's very World War I because it's gas and it's whatever, and you can see their clothes, but at the same time, it feels timeless in the sense that it's war is always hell. I mean, that's like just the way it is. And I think, it's interesting, like the powerlessness that you're talking about, all of these things feel like, how can I say this without offending the entire world? Oh, it's never stopped me before. I think that artists want to think they can make a difference, but I think ultimately it's just a way to make themselves feel better. That I don't think it really makes that much of a difference. That anything that happened that you want to make a difference to has already happened before anybody is influenced by what you're seeing. And it's always a reaction to something. It is very rarely the reactive element.
But an artist, a smart artist, is going to know that the things that create or are created in response to something that has happened, very likely to keep on happening, because humans are violent.
Of course,
and
but as we just
corrupt.
said, here's 3 decades of war, and it didn't change the fact that there was still another one in the 40s and another one in the 50s, and another one happening right now in Ukraine. So what really changed? Some crazy madman with a lot of tanks does something stupid. It's going to happen from here until the end of time.
But you know, for us in our little world, in our little bubble on screen with each other,
yeah,
when we see artwork, does it make us do something?
Yeah, but I guess my question is, even if it does make you do something, is that actually effective, or is it just making you feel better? I don't know. You know, a lot of people can look at the Rockwell and say, yeah, I would stand up there with that little girl and I'd walk her into that school.
You know, I mean,
You know
this painting is, I think, 7 years after that very famous photograph of Elizabeth Eckford.
Yeah.
Little Rock 9.
Yep.
Is the most ugly photograph. This young woman walking with her, I think she's got books in front of her, ready for
the white woman screaming at her. Is that the one?
The spite,
vitriol,
the vitriol and hatred, the fuming nastiness on that face, that woman's face, screaming, shouting, hissing.
I mean, but it's funny because, like, go ahead.
I can't remember what I was going to say.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say that it's interesting. Yes, that is, all of that is true, but that anger, that what is ultimately in that, say, in that white woman's anger is terror that the world is changing and she's powerless against it. So in some ways, and of course it's changing for the better in every way. Well, who knows for this woman personally, who knows, whatever. The point is that ultimately when it comes down to it, it's powerlessness that leads to rage, right?
I don't know if there's rage in this painting, Bill.
I think there's sadness.
Yeah.
But you could argue that just even in the style of composition, there is, there's like this, the way that Picasso breaks things up. There's frustration even in that, So you were saying that this one is not unfinished?
No, I think he intended it to be like this.
Okay, I don't know enough about it. I just noticed, just because the underdrawing and stuff like that, it just seems like he didn't quite get there yet. Yeah, his stuff is usually just a lot more polished. That's the only reason I assumed. It's pretty cool. If you ever do get down to Madrid, in the big room where they have Guernica, they also have all of these photos of the painting in progress and changes that he made over time, like whole big chunks of it that he redid. And it's really interesting just to see the process going all the way along. So. Osama bin Laden.
Does this get a rise from you when you see it? When you see his image, do you react, and do you watch the reaction to see what it is?
I have big answers to this question.
I thought you might.
I mean, I was in New York when it happened. I watched the towers fall. I knew people who died. There were burnt pieces of paper outside the front door of my apartment in Brooklyn because that's the way the wind went out of the towers. So all of that is true and somewhat seared into my memory. And it's interesting when there are people out in the middle of nowhere in America who are very much like, never forget. And it's like, well, first of all, everything will be forgotten eventually. So don't get over yourself. You know, in 1,000 years, no one's going to be writing about 9/11 as a big historical event. A. B. The United States does lots of terrible things in the world. I'm not surprised that there's blowback by people who disagree with us. But at the same time, I'm kind of tired of it. Because in America, we thought about this butt hat for, 10 years. And it's like, again, one jerk with, in this case, a couple of airplanes kills not just 3,000 people in America, but tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people in the wars that came afterwards in order to try to justify, right the wrong somehow, whatever, you want to say.
I don't know how far back along the line of culpability you want to go there.
Oh, I mean, how far back are you talking about?
Well, again, it's thinking about millions of people die because of this man and that action.
But he was that way because,
so
Soviets went into
like
Afghanistan.
Yes, exactly. So it's all.
Yeah. So, right. And that is the problem, is that ultimately, listen, people, even when they do terrible things, are doing it for reasons they think are right. And so when I look at stuff like this and I look at somebody like him who did such damage and such, I'm using the word evil with a lowercase e, evil. Because I'm not giving him, this man is not Satan. He's just a man who just went, his ideology spun out of control.
Okay.
But hold on a second. What I wanted to say is, in some ways I look at this and I don't want to look at it, not because of any of that, but just because, like, I don't want to give him any more attention. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean,
like, I don't care.
Wang says of this, I mean, this is 30 busts of Osama bin Laden. The way his work is described as a kind of blurb is that it plays with the relationship between the media and public consciousness.
What does that mean? That seems like a bunch of art school pretense. What does that mean?
Well, no, look at it. It plays with the relationship between the media and public consciousness. So exactly what you've said, this idea of, like, you're kind of sick of, like, seeing his face, like, fuck off.
In the same way when Rolling Stone put the Boston Marathon bomber on the cover of Rolling Stone or whatever, like that kind of crap too.
It's just kind of like, stop now. Stop.
Sure.
We need to have time to kind of move past this, or maybe not forget in our lifetime, but give room to forget, because we need to forgive or heal or whatever it is we have to do to get on with our lives and somehow be more what we want to say.
But don't you think that ultimately
available to change?
It's not about him. It's about the symbol he becomes, right? And the justification and tribalism and all the things you said about, it's not just Russia, but people hate Russians. It's all of Russia, not just like Putin and the decision makers. But humans are essentially, there's us and them. It's like inborn into our consciousness. And whether that's men and women or different racial structures or skin colors or sexual identities or where you're from on some side of an invisible line, like, people will manipulate the us and them.
But in
forever.
seeing his likeness en masse, life size, are we persuaded to think less about him anymore? Because he becomes so much almost like a wallpaper, or is this overwhelmingly powerful as a driven image or form that still piques our violence.
I feel like this is a representation, like kind of like what I was saying about the Rockwell kind of feeling iconic in a religious sense. This kind of has a religious zeal to it, similar to like the Che Guevara pictures and screen prints and that kind of stuff. It's like, dude, that guy was not that big of a deal, but somehow he has this huge, cult of personality about this guy who died at 32 years old, who didn't actually do all that much in his life, but has a symbolism attached to him that is probably ultimately undeserved. Not that necessarily anybody deserves any symbolism, I guess, is the bigger question. But I think in some ways, this kind of goes down that territory for me.
It does. And I think, last time you told me off rather for getting a bit too esoteric and leading off into a more philosophical realm.
Yeah.
But, the bigger questions is, why do we make images? What are our symbols? How do we use them? Do we use them ever with a good intention? And in fact, can we be sure that our good intentions are seen as good intentions or are indeed good in the eyes of anybody else?
Sure.
Because we see the world through our own prism.
I also think that symbols and stereotypes are, and I don't mean stereotypes in a necessarily negative way, but stereotypes in general are sort of necessary filters that our brains need to sort of sort things,
But they're also incredibly corrosive. And
can be incredibly corrosive, yes.
They don't necessarily allow time to heal. Heal from any kind of trauma that might have come up or about because of events connected with these symbols.
Yeah, I agree. But then again, I don't know if there is any healing but time for an individual event, but it's not going to stop the next thing from happening as much as we want it to. But that's, wish fulfillment kind of stuff.
I mean, as you say, 1,000 years from now, maybe nobody will know about 9/11 or care about it. And that in some cavern where once there was, an art show somewhere in Manhattan, archaeologists uncover a cache of 30 busts of an unknown male.
Yeah, and they'll think that there was some kind of weird religious belief in this, misinterpret it. Yeah.
We're so odd, humans, aren't we?
We are incredibly odd. I remember there's t-shirts that have an apatosaurus on them, like a brontosaurus dinosaur. And underneath it says never forget. And it's like, bad things happen all the time. They are not unique. My father died of cancer. So did 300,000 other people the year that he died of cancer. My father is really a statistic. He's not, you know what I mean? As much as he's an individual, so were the other 300,000 people. I think that a lot of times we think as humans that we are individually special, but we're just some person who lived and will die and will be forgotten about in a few generations when we're out of living memory. And that's what it's about. I don't know. And sometimes I think people like him or Putin or, people who do crazy things, a lot of it's about just that fear of being forgotten. So they want to make an imprint as negative as an imprint is equal to positive. I mean, look through history. We remember the people who did terrible things more than we remember the people who did good things. But yeah, persuasion. I'm still sitting on the fact that these things, they may persuade us, but I don't think they change anything.
What would persuade you, Bill?
Dinner.
Oh, how to make light of something so serious. And on that note,
Thank you, Sandi.
bye.